Hey folks, my name is John Lee and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the Universal Basic Income. The Universal Basic Income, or UBI for short, is not exactly a new topic. It's been talked about by economists for several decades now. But especially in America, it's become a household topic and it's been introduced to a lot of Americans by this man, Andrew Yang. Now, in America, Andrew Yang has talked about the importance and the necessity of the UBI because he believes that automation has taken over too many people's jobs. In Korea, the topic is not so much automation right now, but rather because of COVID 19. And also, Andrew Yang believes that the UBI should be a permanent fixture. Right now in South Korea, things haven't gotten that far yet. While there are some people who are talking about the UBI, it's not yet a serious topic that is being discussed by politicians. Right now in Korea, instead of calling it the UBI, we're calling it the Emergency Disaster Relief Funds. Now, what is the Emergency Disaster Relief Funds? After COVID 19 started to hit every country in the world, the economy started to take a huge hit. And the reason for that is simple. Because of the economic uncertainty that COVID 19 has created, namely because most people don't exactly know when this pandemic will come to an end, a lot of people have started to change their spending habits. People are still spending a lot of money on necessary items like food and masks and things of that nature. But people are not spending their money on things that are deemed unnecessary luxuries. For example, people aren't buying things like cars, people aren't buying things like houses so much, and of course, international travel has also taken a huge hit. And this has led to some rather interesting changes in the economy. Whereas things like luxury brand clothes and cars and travel packages to tourist hotspots have taken a hit and are now cheaper than they used to be in the past, things like lettuce, carrots, pork, and beef have their prices have shot up. It's a very selective type of inflation that we're seeing in the world right now. And because the prices of these everyday items and commodities that we need to survive are going up, whereas the rest of the economy is stalling, the economy is in a lot of trouble. And when there's trouble in one sector of the economy, it rarely ever leads to that trouble remaining there. It eventually spreads to all over the economy. And so, earlier in the spring, the South Korean government believed that in order to make sure that the economy remained afloat, people needed emergency disaster relief funds. Now, not everyone got the same level of money from the government. Some people who lived in different provinces got more than those who lived in others. The public figure in Korea who is most vocal about the necessity of emergency disaster relief funds is this man, who is Jae-myeong. He is the governor of the Gyeonggi province. Now, as you might be aware, South Korea has been one of those few countries that has been praised universally for its handling of COVID 19. However, recently, due to several high profile rallies that have taken place in Seoul, the COVID 19 virus is spreading at an alarming rate. And so, naturally, this has led to a renewed discussion about giving out additional emergency disaster relief funds. And Gyeonggi Governor Lee Jae-myung is very insistent on pointing out that his support for these funds should not be taken as a support for additional welfare payments. He doesn't like the word welfare being used for his policy ideas because he believes that these are supposed to be emergency disaster relief funds and not welfare. But whether people call this a social welfare program or a disaster relief package, what doesn't change is that this is a direct payment of money from the government to individual citizens. And especially for those people who have either lost their jobs or those who earn very low incomes, this sort of proposal that Governor Lee Jae-myung is supporting is extremely welcome. Naturally, however, not everyone agrees with the necessity or even the prudence of the emergency disaster relief funds. One of the most high profile public figures who has spoken out against the emergency disaster relief funds, or at least a second round of it, is this man, Nak-yeon, who is a former prime minister of Korea. Now, Prime Minister Nak-yeon doesn't believe that it is prudent to be talking about a second round of emergency disaster relief funds because he doesn't believe that the South Korean government can afford to do so. Due to the spread of COVID 19, the South Korean government has had to spend more money than it allocated for itself in its annual budget. In fact, it has had additional budgets passed 3 times already so far. When Prime Minister Nak-yeon was asked about the first round of the Emergency Disaster Relief Fund, he defended the first round by saying that at the time, the South Korean government was able to use some accounting tricks. It was able to take some money from here, take some money from there, and it was able to scrounge whatever money that it needed to give out those emergency disaster relief funds. But right now, the government has already scraped the bottom of the barrel. If the government wants to give out another round of emergency disaster relief funds to the public, Prime Minister Nak-yeon says that the South Korean government will have no choice but to go into debt. Prime Minister Nak-yeon's points cannot be ignored. Now, for countries like America that enjoys having its currency being the world's reserve currency, the United States might simply be able to print more money and would be able to at least withstand some of the inflationary pressures that would come with it. The same does not apply to Korea. The Korean won is not a reserve currency. So especially for countries that don't have a reserve currency, going into debt to provide universal basic income becomes more challenging, and the concerns that Prime Minister Nak-yeon has raised cannot simply be ignored. So Prime Minister Nak-yeon's position is one of caution. COVID-19 could get better or could get worse. If it does get worse, people will need money then, much more desperately than people need it now. But if the government already goes into debt now in order to give out the second disaster relief funds, then would the government be able to help the people then when they really need help? That's the position that Nak-yeon is taking. For his part, Governor Jae-myeong believes that even if South Korea does go into debt, it is important that every person be given the second round of disaster relief funds. He believes that every person should be given 300,000 won, which comes up to roughly about 250 American dollars. Governor Jae-myeong supports his position by pointing to a lot of developed economies around the world. He points out that a lot of developed economies around the world have a debt to GDP ratio that exceeds 100%. However, in South Korea's case, at least according to Governor Jae-myeong, South Korea's debt to GDP ratio is at around 40%. And he also insists that even if every South Korean person is given 300,000 won, that would increase Korea's GDP to debt ratio by only 0.7%. Now, whether or not his mathematics is right is another question entirely. So although I started this video talking about the UBI, which is an indefinite distribution of funds from the government to the people, in Korea right now, because of the state of the economy, and because it's nowhere near as large as an economy as that of the United States, right now, we're not even able to talk about the UBI. Right now, we're talking about emergency disaster relief funds, which is at most a 1 or maybe 2-time thing. It is not indefinite. Whether we're talking about an indefinite payment of money in the form of UBI, or whether we're talking about a 1 or 2-time payment of emergency relief funds, what's important is that yes, we also have to talk about whether or not our society can afford these kind of payments, but we also have to talk about whether or not the benefits that would be accrued from the money being distributed to the public could also might offset those costs. Now, in economics, there's a thing called the multiplier effect. And the multiplier effect states that when people spend money, that money will eventually circulate around the economy. For example, if I bought a t-shirt for $10, the person who sold me that t-shirt for $10 would be able to use that money to buy, let's say, a watch that costs $8. And that person who sold him that watch for $8 would be able to use that money to buy, let's say, an apple for $5. I'm using horrible examples here, but the basic principle is that when people use money, everyone else who has that money will be able to use more of that money, and eventually it goes around the economy, and the economy will be better off. So, according to the multiplier effect theory, if everyone in the country is given $250, they would use that money. And the reason they spend that money is simple. $250 is only worth $250 if you spend that money. If you stuff that money underneath your mattress, that $250 becomes worth zero. Money is only worth its value when it is spent on something that you feel is worth exchanging for. Now, in this economy, it would be highly unlikely that people would be using that $250 to go on vacation. They would use that money on necessary everyday items like food, water, and sanitary products. And for people who are either unemployed or who have low income, an additional $250 is nothing to scoff at. And so naturally, this debate between Governor Jae-myeong and Prime Minister Nak-yeon has also political ramifications. Unlike in America, where the president serves a maximum of 2 terms for 4 years each term, a South Korean president can only serve for one single 5-year term. Once President Moon Jae-in's term is over, he cannot seek re-election. And it was widely assumed until recently that Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon would be the most likely candidate who will replace him. That assumption has been questioned lately. Over the past week or so, according to a lot of polls, Governor Jae-myeong, who was always in second place, has now overtaken Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon and is now a leading contender to become the next South Korean president. But of course, South Korea's next presidential election won't take place until March 2022. There's still quite a bit of time left before election day. So, right now at least, all of these polls that tell who is leading against who might not really matter all that much. But that being said, politicians would still be looking at these numbers and will be taking a lot of notes as to what they should be doing in the future. And this leads us to an interesting debate question. Is it more beneficial to hand out these emergency disaster relief funds to the public now, or is it more beneficial to save them and wait for a rainy day, or in this case, a rainier day? And if these emergency funds are much more beneficial at the hands of the average person, then why not upgrade it a step further? Why not turn it into a much more permanent universal basic income program? Now, personally, I've come around the universal basic income. I believe that not only is it necessary, I also believe that it is moral. However, even if it is necessary or moral, if the universal basic income turns out to be unaffordable, then no matter how justified the moral arguments for it may be, the universal basic income program could very well be a non-starter. And so this is where I would like all of you to weigh in on the subject. If you have any comments that you would like to share, if you have strong opinions on the UBI in one form or another, please share them down below. Alright, that about wraps it up. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell. And as I said earlier, if you have a comment, please share them below. My name is John Lee, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.